2025년은 한국의 전례 없는 불확실성이 가해진 격동의 한 해였습니다. 세계 질서는 빠르게 재편되고 있습니다. 미중 전략 경쟁의 심화부터 북한, 중국, 러시아의 연대, 전쟁이 이어지는 우크라이나, 불안정한 중동까지 과거의 질서는 무너지고 새로운 질서가 만들어지면서 혼란은 계속되고 있습니다. 조기 정권 교체로 정치적 불안정이 찾아왔고 트럼프 2기 행정부의 고관세 부과 선언은 한국 경제 전반을 흔들었습니다. 글로벌 공급망 재편과 환율 변동성, 첨단 산업 기술 경쟁까지 겹치며 우리는 한순간도 긴장을 늦출 수 없습니다. 부동산 정책 변화와 악화되는 노사 갈등, 그리고 성장 동력의 약화까지 우리는 더 이상 과거의 방식으로 살아갈 수 없는 전환의 시대를 맞이했습니다. 이 불확실성 속에서 대한민국은 어떤 방향을 선택해야 할까요? 그 해답을 찾기 위해 세계적인 석학과 정책 결정자, 글로벌 리더들이 한자리에 모였습니다. 2025 글로벌 리더스 포럼, 경랑의 세계 속 한국의 길을 묻습니다.
미중 갈등의 불똥이 튄 우리나라 반도체 업계 피해가 우려됩니다.
교류와 관계 정상화, 비핵화를 통해 한반도의 냉전을 끝내겠다.
한국의 핵 추진 잠수함 건조를 승인했습니다.
영화에서나 봤던 미래가 이곳 CES에서는 이미 현실로 성큼 다가와 있습니다.
코스피는 3,600선을 돌파하며 또 사상 최고치를 썼습니다.
10명 이상 간제 사망 사고가 발생하면 영업이익의 최대 5%를 과징금으로 내라는 건데
서울 전역과 경기 12개 지역이 토지거래 허가구역으로 바뀌었죠.
트럼프 미 대통령이 가상화폐 스테이블 코인의 규제 방안이 담긴 일명 지니어스 법을 선정했습니다.
K-팝 데몬 헌터스의 인기가 전 세계적으로 뜨겁습니다. K-푸드 열풍이 유럽에서도 거세게 불고 있습니다.
어느 때보다 경제에 대한 불안이 커져가는 시점입니다. 금융시장 변동성과 금리 환율 충격, 그리고 글로벌 공급망 위기 속에 누구도 미래를 장담할 수 없습니다.
TV조선은 13년째 글로벌 리더스 포럼을 통해 시대의 흐름을 읽고 우리 사회가 나아갈 방향을 함께 모색해 왔습니다.
기조연설자로 나선 세계적 경제석학 카르멘 라인하트 하버드대 석좌 교수는 지금 우리가 직면한 위기를 단순한 경기 침체가 아닌 누적된 부채와 구조적 불균형이 만들어낸 복합 위기라고 경고합니다.
The title of this global forum appropriately chose the term turbulent. The fact of the matter is we have major shocks globally that importantly impact an open economy like Korea.
라인하트 교수는 한국 경제에 대해선 치솟는 가계부채 문제를 지적했습니다.
You know, debt buildups, and I'm coming to that, are easier to avoid than to undo. So I will repeat that message subsequently. However, where Korea has to worry about, and this is really my other big message, is what I mentioned very early on. The whole story is not just about public debt. It's also private debt. And household debt in Korea is significantly above the metrics for most advanced economies. Furthermore, if you read the very carefully done, I really praise the central bank for their financial stability report, there are concerns about increases in debt servicing increases in non-performing assets associated with housing. The rental system in Korea is such that it also produces these hidden debts. It's actually worse. It looks worse if we included the hidden debts. Dimension that I highlighted covers, a 35-year period. And in that period, the financial sector in Korea has really pivoted away from lending to businesses to lending for housing. So a lot of the Korean financial system had become very housing-centric. If I were asked what the main risks in Korea are, they are very connecting to household, housing, potential overvaluation, and what it would imply for the risks of the financial sector.
고령화에 대비한 사회적 비용의 필요성도 제기했습니다.
I don't need to come here and say one of the major challenges for potential growth and for year-to-year on growth Korea will face in the period ahead is its demographics. Rising dependency ratios historically have been a key driver when one looks at the academic literature on what drives growth long-term. Dependency ratios rank very highly. These are turning for the worse in the case of Korea, like other advanced economies.
라이나트 교수는 AI는 철도, 인터넷과 같은 반복된 혁신에 불과하다며 그 부작용을 강조했습니다.
Lack of knowing history is problematic in interpreting the current AI phenomenon. Can you tell me that AI is the first productivity-enhancing invention in the last 225 years? I don't think so, right? We've had many. Transportation innovations, the telegraph, electrification, the internet. I went to an immersion seminar, an immersion little course in Stanford on AI. And also this was coupled with the Silicon Valley. And the question the wonders of what AI can do was very clear throughout all the presentations. What nobody could tell me is, okay, what does it mean for growth? And I think the jury is really out. And so far, what we're seeing in the US, at least initial stages, is that the number of layoffs that are associated with AI have increased recently.
그렇다면 한국의 AI 투자 확대는 어떻게 바라보고 있을까요? 우리는 무엇을 주의하고 어떤 선택을 해야 할까요?
There is strategic investment. There's areas where it makes sense that, Korea has had a competitive edge. I mentioned the semiconductors are very, it's connected to the AI cycle. There's certain, you can't make blanket statements that all investments. But the point that I made is that the expectation, that AI is this silver bullet in terms of delivering productivity gains, and that you would think, well, productivity gains transfer to higher growth, I'm at a loss, okay? Maybe you all know, I certainly don't. When I have repeatedly asked the question of how does the AI technology help us, the conviction that it's productivity enhancing is widely held. However, there is also important distinction between when AI is complementary to labor and when it is a substitution for labor. So the issue of labor displacement is also very real. During the conversation this morning, I made the point that economists had done a rather poor job explaining and selling trade, that they had oversold the benefits of trade, that you have, if you have a real model of trade, it's the gains from trade, everybody gains, right? So, you know, the part where many consumers gained in the US was very clear, right? You have cheaper prices, better quality, more variety. However, there are losers, those that were in manufacturing industries that were displaced from abroad. In a perfect world, those that lost were given transfers to compensate them. So everybody's worse off, right? The ones that were losers, were compensated, and the ones that were winners, the consumers, are better off. However, the transfers never happen. So backlash was the outgrowth. Why am I talking about this? AI is very similar. AI will displace, and indeed you could argue that the displacement is going to be actually very distinct, and that it will hit low-income groups harder. Who's going to do the transfers, right? Especially in the context of aging population, more indebtedness, and so on. So, my concern with AI, apart from the valuation issue, which we can talk about, right? Because is that, the expectation that it's a win-win, that it's not clear. And furthermore, that I think it is a winner-takes-all situation in which, everybody's investing more, but, not everyone will be. Yeah, and that you will have excess capacity if you're not the winners, among the winners. But look, let me be very clear. I don't think the issue of timing a bubble is even a feasible discussion. The idea that, well, I kind of know that this is how long they last, or this. It could go on. It could stop tomorrow. It could be that the corrections we've seen are already a signal of what's to come, or it could go on for longer. But by definition, bubbles burst. We just don't know when. I certainly don't know when.
격동의 시기 세계 질서는 빠르게 변하고 있습니다. 국제 정치학의 세계적인 석학 아미타브 아차리아 교수는 세계 질서의 변화를 어떻게 전망할까요?
From a kind of a U.S.-dominated, what used to be called or still is called the unipolar moment, to many people call it a multipolar world. And there we see a major change from the liberal international order, liberal hegemony, the U.S.-led, West-led, liberal. And I believe the world order that is emerging, and again, it's not just about distribution of power. It's much more what I call non-hegemonic or post-hegemonic. I call it a multiplex world rather than multipolar world. So the actors are not just great powers, or there are also regional powers, there are middle powers, there are, of course, international institutions, and of course, non-state actors and corporations.
세계 질서의 재편 속 한국은 어떤 외교 노선을 취해야 할까요?
Because Japan, I know Japan South Korea have their own conflicts. But I think if you are faced with a situation with China, North Korea, and Russia getting together, South Korea also has to have its own friends. And of course, the United States is one of them. But certainly, having Japan on its side helps because, Japan is also not a friend of China or Russia or North Korea. So South Korea and Japan, South Korea and United States, maybe on a trilateral basis, should increase cooperation. Another thing is that South Korea should be more active in the United Nations and in regional groups like ASEAN Regional Forum to create a kind of a diplomatic position against any threat from these three countries.
미국과의 관계는 어떻게 설정해야 할까요? 아미타브 교수는 미국과의 동맹을 유지하는 것이 한국의 이익이라고 강조했습니다.
So my sense is that in general, the U.S. strategy does benefit South Korea, because in every sense of the term, in security, it provides protection against North Korea, for example. And economically, it's more controversial, but being a friend and ally of the U.S., you do get some economic benefits, you get investment, and American companies are more willing to invest in a country that is allied, is considered a friend rather than an enemy. And there are downsides. The downside is that for South Korea, sometimes it becomes too dependent on the U.S. U.S. market, U.S. military protection, and also this friendship or alliance between U.S. and South Korea sometimes provokes North Korea. In some ways, it kind of makes the North Korean threat even worse. So there are downsides, but on balance, it does benefit South Korea.
이재명 대통령 정부가 임기 내 전환을 목표로 하는 전시작전 통제권 환수에 대한 입장도 들어봤습니다.
That really depends on what is the crisis, what is the nature of the threat. So if it is a nuclear attack from North Korea, I think it will be much more a U.S.-controlled operation. South Korea will have very little say on how the response happens, and that is assuming the U.S. wants to get involved, right? You may have a situation when South Korea faces an attack, but the U.S. doesn't get involved, or it happens so quickly, there's no time for the U.S. to respond. But let's assume that the U.S. is involved, it gets the warning signals, and comes to defend North Korea. I think that case, the U.S. will call all the shots. But if it is a slow-moving, conventional attack, and it drags on for some time, it doesn't get over in 1 day or 2 days, then I think South Korea would have it should be able to retain some control, operational control. But it is a good idea that for South Korea and the U.S. to talk it over beforehand, anytime, not at the onset of the war, but before the war actually, or if there is to be war, happens. And to make plans of what happens if there is an attack, who does what, it's a kind of division of labor. It's possible that South Korea will control logistics, providing support, U.S. forces, that will be under South Korean control. But when it comes to military operations, frontline, it all depends on the nature of the attack. Sometimes the nature of the U.S. intervention is not very clear, and sometimes they may let the South Koreans take the lead in army ground offensive. When it comes to naval and air force, I think United States would probably want to control. Americans don't want to concede control of their forces to to another country. They usually, historically, don't do that. So it will be very difficult or rare for South Korea to have any meaningful control over operational forces unless it is worked out in advance and unless it's about logistics rather than actual combat operations.
세계 질서의 재편 속 남북 관계의 해법도 좀처럼 실마리가 보이지 않습니다. 30년 이상 남북 관계를 연구하고 미국 정부와 한미 연합사령부 등에서 한국 관련 업무에 종사해온 시드니 사일러 CSIS 선임 고문에게 우리가 가야 할 길을 물어봤습니다.
Deterrence works, but requires dynamic application. A good long-term deterrence policy to deter the North Korean nuclear threat needs to be able to accommodate the worldview and policies of progressives when they come to government, so that we have a period where we try to reach out to North Korea, we try to bring them to the table.
사일러 선임 고문은 최근 강화되고 있는 북중러 연대는 어떻게 바라보고 있을까요? 이 협력 구도의 의미와 한반도에 미칠 영향을 들어봤습니다.
Well, North Korea has been thrown a lifeline by Russia and its willingness to deal with North Korea in spite of its reluctance to denuclearize, in spite of overwhelming sanctions. And the type of assistance that North Korea has given Russia has actually helped North Korea modernize its own munitions industry, improve its artillery and missile production. And I think between that and the other diplomatic and tangible economic assistance that Russia is giving to North Korea, it's a much more dangerous North Korea today than it was before North Korea began to support Russia in Ukraine. I think it is strategic in nature. These are authoritarian, autocratic, personalistic leaders who tend to be paranoid and not trust each other. So this is not like the US-ROK relationship or the US-ROK-Japan relationship, but it is strategic in nature. They have a shared worldview. It's a very dysfunctional revisionist worldview that justifies the use of force to achieve these types of challenges to the status quo. And I think this is why this relationship is troubling for the security of the Republic of Korea. And it requires close cooperation with the United States and the international community, including China in particular, as your neighbor with whom you might have some leverage because of the deep economic ties, that the dangerous impact of this does not lead to instability in Northeast Asia because of North Korean adventurism.
최근 한미가 잠수함 기반 핵 협력, 이른바 JFS를 발표했습니다. 이 협력이 한반도의 억제력을 강화할까요? 아니면 남북 간 긴장을 더욱 고조시킬까요?
Well, I think it will help mitigate inter-Korea tensions. North Korea thrives on its ability to achieve some type of military advantage, whether it's conventional or nuclear, so that it can dominate the ROK. Ultimately, Kim Jong-un himself has said that's part of the intent of the nuclear capability, but also short of armed conflict to diplomatically be able to dominate and intimidate South Korea. And so South Korea developing a capability like a nuclear submarine will actually help demonstrate to Kim Jong-un or whoever may follow him that South Korea has capabilities that can defend against its nuclear program, however much it may grow. So I actually think when North Korea sees that, that'll actually contribute more to the stability in the region. I would in no way believe that South Korea's pursuit of a nuclear powered submarine is actually going to be destabilizing either in terms of your relationship with North Korea or your relationship with China. They will certainly express rhetorical dismay and opposition to your pursuit, but I would just ignore that as propaganda. Strength and peace through force will be key going forward to deal with the North Korea and Chinese threats.
최근 트럼프 정부가 발표한 국가안보 전략 NSS에는 북한의 비핵화를 사실상 더 이상 전면에 두지 않는 듯한 메시지가 담겼습니다. 사일러 선임 고문은 그 이유를 뭐라고 볼까요?
He knows what can be achieved. I think President Trump's approach to North Korea should be seen in terms of its pragmatism, flexibility, and creativity. He's willing to be flexible. He's willing to talk to adversaries, and that can help contribute to peace in the region. But he's pragmatic. He knows the challenges. He knows the North Korean nuclear program, its qualitative and quantitative dimensions, its threat that it poses to the United States, threat it poses to a close ally here in the Republic of Korea, and the threat that North Korea's nuclear capabilities pose to international security.
트럼프 정부는 관세 정책을 앞세워 경제적 불확실성을 촉발시켰습니다. 관세 정책에 대한 이와타 가즈마사 전 일본은행 부총재의 분석을 들어보겠습니다.
Yes, that tariff policy, Trump's tariff policy, great uncertainty prevailed when the Trump version 2.0 started, and he argued a lot about the tariff policy, and I am a tariff man, he said so, and everybody concerned what would be going to happen. I provided at this conference our simulation outcome. In case Trump administration adopts 100% tariff and retaliation tariff by China, 100%, this is a tariff war. This is a tit-for-tat strategy. Really, people anticipate that kind of tariff war. Then outcome would be negative 1% impact on real GDP for East Asian countries. This is sizable. So, but at the same time, they pointed out there may be a great risk on the financial fields. There is a fragility of financial areas at the same time. Therefore, my answer to your question is maybe very difficult to calculate, but my calculation is about negative 1% as uncertainty itself.
그렇다면 커져가는 불확실성 속에서 경제 위기를 돌파할 해법은 없을까요? 인공지능이 새로운 대안으로 주목받는 지금 AI 분야 석학 조슈아 간스의 시선을 통해 그 가능성과 한계를 짚어봅니다.
With artificial intelligence, we have a flow of information coming in, but we do not yet have the economic institutions, the business organizations, and anything else to really make use of it. And it's not that we won't have that, we just don't have that at the moment. And I think this is something that we should take to heart. And so the people who are doing the investment in AI infrastructure, data centers, training, inference generation, all of those things around them, in order to justify the investments that they currently have, what is holding in their terms of their beliefs is that AI is going to be work rather than AI is just a tool. Now, why is that important? I use the term belief. And the term belief connotes that this is some possibility that this could occur, but it's not 100% guaranteed.
Well, I think the big difference between those who think that change is going to happen very quickly and those who do not is not so much that the AI capabilities aren't outstanding, they're quite transformative, but instead it is, in order to reap the benefits of it, a lot of things need to change. And so while you might have AI that performs very well on technical metrics, the kind of adoption that would need to satisfy those who think it's all going to happen in a number of years would be unprecedented. Well, there are probably a lot of organizational redesigns. And in fact, I don't know, and nobody really knows which ones are needed. So the things that need to be redesigned are probably quite extensive. The issue is that I don't know, nor does anyone really know what is needed. What we do know is that historically, for technologies of a similar scope to what AI promises to be, such as the internet, railroads, electricity, the amount of redesign was actually quite extensive and took many decades in those particular cases. And there's no real evidence that things are going to be any different with regards to artificial intelligence.
AI 도입에 아직 많은 단계가 남았다면 AI에 대한 투자 확대를 어떻게 평가할까요?
Really unprecedented amount of investment. I don't know where Korea sits in the scheme of things, but if you look globally, these investments are on a par with internet investments and approaching that occurred in terms of the size of the economy for railway investments in the 19th century. The issue is not so much the scale of the investment, but the expectations regarding how soon investors are going to expect a return on that. And so that's where it ties into the speed of adoption. In order for there to be a return on the investment, the adoption must occur, and the adoptees have to pay enough to justify that investment. Now, I suspect that if you had many decades of time horizon, this would be okay. The issue is when you see such rapid investment concentrated right now, what are the expectations regarding returns in the next 5 years? And that is something to be worried about.
AI가 사회적 불평등을 심화시킬 거란 지적에 대한 입장도 들어봤습니다.
Well, actually, no. It's not clear at all whether AI is going to be something that increases or decreases inequality. In fact, a lot of the evidence we have thus far is that artificial intelligence really helps people who are lacking particular skills be more productive. And so that tends to equalize pay rates and things like that. But we don't yet know where that's going to lie. But it's far from obvious that this is going to be something that is going to lead to a massive amount of inequality. And certainly, if those who have been investing this large amount in artificial intelligence don't receive the returns quickly, that is actually not an issue for inequality, but actually the reverse.
한국 정부와 국회는 자본시장 육성을 위해 상법 개정안 등 세제 개편을 추진하고 있습니다. 이에 대해 글로벌 경제 전문가들은 한국의 변화를 어떻게 평가할까요? 파비오 다 실바 세계은행 수석연구위원에게 한국의 자본시장 활성화 방안을 물었습니다.
Any corporate increase, has the potential for be a drag on growth. But on the other hand, I understand that Korean government is trying to achieve a healthier fiscal position, and therefore they chose to go on increasing the taxes. Just have to be careful what would be the impact on growth. And also the other aspect is the sustainability. You have in order for Korea to be an attractive market, you want to be consistent, and when you raise taxes one year and you lower tax the next year, that creates uncertainty, and so that some investors might consider that as a deterrent, to come into Korea. So you have to balance the need for raising taxes versus the potential impact on growth.
그는 싱가포르의 자본시장 정책을 모범 사례로 꼽았습니다. 그렇다면 어떤 점을 특히 긍정적으로 평가했을까요?
Well, one of the big aspects of Singapore is the sustainable environment. There is lack of surprises, so it's been consistently, the policies have been consistent over the last 30 years. The other aspect, Singapore has very low tax rate. And with a strategy of being a financial hub for headquarters, regional headquarters, whereas Korea is an industrial powerhouse. And in Korea, because of that, Korea has certain rules that could be perceived as restrictive to foreign investment. So perhaps Korea being a little bit more flexible and open in terms of its regulations, it could work towards attracting foreign investments here.
새 정부는 고용시장 전반에 걸친 변화를 예고하고 있습니다. 그렇다면 노동정책을 설계하고 추진하는 과정에서 유의해야 할 점은 무엇일까요? 유럽의 노동정책을 오랫동안 연구해온 IMF 유럽국 부국장의 분석을 들어봅니다.
Good labor market institutions should meet these objectives, but in a way that is consistent with economic efficiency. It means, one, you need to preserve high and stable employment. And second, you also need labor market institutions that foster productivity. Right? That is an efficient allocation of resources, across industries, across firms, especially in a very fast-changing world that we are facing today.
지난 8월 국회에선 노동조합의 손해배상 책임을 제한하고 교섭 대상이 되는 사용자의 범위를 확대하는 노란봉투법이 통과됐습니다. 이 법이 노동자 보호라는 취지를 얼마나 실현할 수 있을지 전문가들의 평가를 들어봅니다.
So I think your question raises the broader issue of trust between social partners, that is trust between employers and workers. And you know, in countries where you have high trust between employers and workers, in fact, in the first place, you do not necessarily need strict labor laws to protect workers because there's other arrangements that can protect workers. Right? For example, in the Nordic European countries, what you see is that you have more extensive unemployment insurance systems, right? And typically labor laws that are more permissive, that is, it's easier to lay off workers, for example, in a country like Denmark. And these kinds of arrangements, you know, where you have a more extensive unemployment insurance and easier labor laws, that's actually a kind of arrangement that's going to preserve the business environment while at the same time protecting workers, right, against the risk of income loss. And so that's one benefit from being able to build trust, you know, among social partners. You're able to have these kind of labor market institutions that work really well. And the other benefit from being able to build trust among social partners is that when a crisis comes, you're going to be better able to negotiate quickly the kind of adjustments that are going to save jobs. For example, you're going to be able to negotiate quickly a reduction in hours worked or a reduction in wages that's going to preserve employment in crisis times. And again, you know, these Nordic European countries did actually just that in the early 90s when they faced a financial crisis. So to me, that really suggests there's really a lot of benefit from moving towards you know, better trust among social partners, and you need to build that trust.
이재명 대통령의 대선 공약이었던 주 4.5일제가 본격 논의되고 있는 만큼 근로시간 단축에 대한 입장도 들어봤습니다.
So you know, a reduction in working time over time in countries that have experienced very high productivity growth gains, such as Korea and many other advanced economies before Korea. A reduction in working time is sort of natural, right? It's one way through which the higher productivity gains translate into improved well-being for workers. The other way is to increase wages, of course. So it's natural, but then when you look at the international experience, you see that it can happen in two different ways. One way is through negotiation. You negotiate directly with the employer and you can reduce the working time. For example, in the Germans' automotive industry, it's not infrequent to see a 4 days per week working week. But in some other countries, you see this reduction in the working week taking place by law. And in those cases, when you want to reduce the working week by law, I think you need to be taking into account the following factors. One is that at the end of the day, there will be a reduction in the purchasing power of workers because there can be productivity gains from reducing the working week, but they are not going to fully offset the loss of working time. Right? So at the end of the day, in the long term, you will see some reduction in real wages. So that's one, consequence to be borne in mind. And the second thing is to maximize the chances of increasing productivity when you reduce the working week. It's important that it be implemented in a flexible manner. And by flexible, I mean that you want to keep some flexibility in how you reduce the working time over the year. Right? For example, you can annualize the reduction in working time rather than having 4 days a week or 4.5 days a week, whatever you want to achieve. And second, also you need sometimes flexibility across sectors because for some sectors it's very easy to reduce working times. For others, it's much more difficult. So these are kinds of lessons from the past experiences, in a country, for example, like France, which has this famous 35-hour week.
불확실성의 시대 속에서도 세계가 주목하는 한국의 힘이 있습니다.
이 대한민국에 숨겨져 있는 저력, 우리 K컬처에는 어떠한 스토리가 있을까요?
바로 전 세계를 사로잡은 대한민국의 경쟁력 K컬처입니다. 애니메이션 K-팝 데몬헌터스를 통해 확인된 글로벌 K컬처 열풍은 그 가능성을 다시 한번 증명했습니다. 전통무예 태권도의 춤을 결합해서 현대적인 감각으로 작품을 만들어낸 K-팝 데몬 헌터스의 주역들을 만나봤습니다.
태권도는 싸움의 기술이 아니라 감정의 춤이다. 이 말은 곧 K-팝 데몬 헌터스의 액션 앤 철학의 출발점이 되었습니다. 저는 태권도의 점프, 회전, 발차기를 단순 기술이 아닌 캐릭터의 감정, 성장, 드라마로 변환해야 한다고 생각을 했습니다. 애니메이션과 실사 영상에서 저의 액션, 한국 전통 무술의 세계관적 표현이 되었고 이는 글로벌 팬들에게 강렬한 인상을 남겼습니다.
태권도 기반으로 따졌을 때는 태권도가 스포츠이자 또 무술이자 또 이제 문화적으로 이 3대 요소를 제일 잘 갖추고 있어서 약간 대중적이라고 생각을 해요.
처음에 저희한테 제의가 들어왔던 거는 무술이었습니다. 무술 액션씬만 제의가 왔었는데 저희 대표님께서 안창범 대표님께서 우리 춤도 잘 춘다. 춤으로도 태권도 보여줄 수 있다라고 얘기를 해주신 덕분에 이런 좋은 기회로 태권도를 이용한 안무를 만들게 되었는데요. 처음에는 소다팝이랑 헌트릭스의 그 하우이치던이라는 노래에 제작 의뢰를 받았습니다. 그래서 한 곡당 총 3개의 안무를 만들어서 6개 안무를 진행을 했고요. 최대한 이 노래를 어떻게 태권도를 녹여서 만들어낼까라는 생각을 많이 했었습니다. 덕분에 대표님도 많이 도와주시고 우리 태미 배우님도 너무 많이 도와주셔가지고 좋은 작품이 나와서 이렇게 좋은 결과로 소다팝과 6월 아이돌을 보여드릴 수 있다는 게 너무 감격스럽고요.
그래서 이제 K대헌은 한국 문화 확장의 새로운 흐름을 만든 대표 작품이라고 말해도 과언이 아닐 거라고 저는 생각을 합니다. 단순한 콘텐츠를 넘어서 IP 중심의 산업 확장성을 증명했다고 보고요. K-팝, K-음식, K-전통문화, 한국어 등 다양한 한국 문화 전반에 대한 글로벌 관심을 동시에 확장시킬 수 있는 사례를 남겼다고 보고 또 이뿐만이 아니라 산업, 문화, 관광 등 다양한 부문으로 확장 가능성을 제시했다고 생각을 합니다.
글로벌 팬들을 사로잡을 또 하나의 무기가 있습니다. 바로 K푸드로 대표되는 한식의 경쟁력입니다. 명품 그룹 LVMH의 아르노 회장 역시 와이너리를 가지며 푸드를 고급화 전략의 중요한 축으로 활용하고 있습니다. 한국의 음식 또한 브랜드화를 통해 새로운 가능성을 모색하고 있다고 하는데요. 제주메밀을 재배하는 보름왓 이종인 대표는 음식의 이야기를 담아야 비로소 가치가 완성된다고 강조합니다.
메밀이라는 물질을 판매하는 것도 맞지만 사실 메밀이라는 믿음과 욕망과 건강을 저희는 파는 거예요. 그리고 이제는 그것을 갖고서 스토리 투어를 합니다. 사실상 이 스토리 투어로 농업이 완성이 되는 거예요. 그러면 앞으로 농업은 그냥 농사만 육체적으로 하면 되는 게 아니라요. 거기에 디자인부터 스토리 이것을 다 입혀놔야 된다. 그러면 과거에 10만 평 농사에서 1억 벌 것이냐 아니면 1000평을 농사해서 1억을 벌 것인가. 네. 문제를 문제로 볼 줄 아는 사회, 문제를 기회로 볼 줄 아는. 그러면 자본이 아닌 아이템으로도 충분히 저는 승산이 있다고 봅니다.
포럼의 토론자로 참여한 김창욱 강연자도 음식에 대한 색다른 시선을 공유했습니다.
저희 아버지가 청각장애가 있으셨었는데 아버지 수술을 하러 병원을 가다가 아주 간단한 인간의 구조를 알았어요. 사람의 소리는 이게 진동이잖아요. 그러면 귀로 들어가서 고막에서 확장을 해준대요. 그러면 어디로 가냐면 달팽이관. 달팽이관이 와우라고 하거든요. 와우가 영어가 아니고 달팽이관이라는 뜻이에요. 그래서 그 달팽이관이 뭘 해주냐면 진동을 뭘로 바꿔줄까요? 진동을 전기신호로 바꿔준대요. 달팽이관이. 그럼 맛도 입에서 느끼지만 뭘로 바꿔줘요? 뇌로 갈 때? 전기신호로. 눈도 우리가 보는 것도 눈으로 보는 것 같지만 이것도 다 전기신호로 바꿔서 뇌로 가는 거고. 근데 사람들이 되게 재미있어요. 뭔가 다른 감각기관인데 되게 좋다라고 할 때 맛있다라고 표현하는 게 많아요. 네. 왜냐하면 맛이 너무 보편적인 거니까. 입을 통해 가는 거지만, 그래서 모든 음식은 제가 보기에 음식 자체로 먹지 못하고 뭔가 과거의 추억과 섞어 먹는 게 있거든요. 그렇죠? 그러니까 음식도 선별해서 먹고, 특별히 좋은 거 보고 좋은 거 듣고, 그것도 다 우리의 뇌가 먹는 거니까 할 수 있다면 좋은 걸 먹었으면 좋겠어요. 자, 어제의 나와 오늘 먹은 음식이 내일의 나다.
세계의 변화를 논의하는 자리 한편에서 그 변화를 가장 먼저 체감하는 이들이 있습니다. 바로 미래를 살아갈 청년들입니다.
저는 평소에도 이런 포럼에 참석하는 것을 굉장히 즐겨 하는데요. 이번 TV조선의 글로벌 리더스 포럼에는 정말 화려한 라인업이 있었기 때문에 전문가들의 의견을 가까이서 듣고 싶은 마음으로 지원했습니다.
혁신 성장을 위한 투자 활성화와 규제 완화라는 주제의 포럼을 저는 좀 기대했는데요. 규제 완화라고 하는 것이 규제 혁파, 규제 혁신과 어느 정도의 궤를 달리하고 있는지, 그리고 규제 완화라는 것이 어느 정도의 범주로서의 완화를 말하고 있는 것인지 구체적인 그 정도에 대해서 궁금했습니다.
격한 파도, 그리고 격변하는 이 시대, 그리고 복잡한 이 다자관계 속에서 많은 국가들과 그리고 단체들이 서로의 이익을 취할 것은 취하되 서로의 안위를 또 위협하지 않는 쪽으로 적절한 타협점을 찾아가면서
한미 팩트시트, 그리고 관세 협상, 또 환율에 대한 궁금증들을 해소할 수 있었습니다. 막연하게 궁금하기만 했던 부분들이었는데 다양한 데이터를 기반으로, 그리고 이론적 근거들을 기반으로 명쾌하게 설명을 해주셔서 제 궁금증이 잘 해소가 됐던 것 같습니다.
사실 격변하는 시대라고 이제 모토에도 나와 있는데 저는 그런 시대일수록 공론장이 되게 중요하다고 생각을 해요. 그래서 이렇게 각국의 연사님들은 물론이고 이제 정말 관심이 많고 활발한 청년들이 한데 모을 수 있는 자리가 쉽지 않은데, 그래서 정말 이런 포럼이 중요하다고 생각하고,
이런 포럼들과 다양한 행사들을 통해서 저희 청년 세대들이 앞으로 조금 더 많은 기회를 얻고 많은 교육을 받을 수 있을 거라고 생각을 합니다.
이틀 동안 우리는 세계 경제의 혼돈 속에서 한국의 현실을 마주하고 그 해법을 함께 고민했습니다. 외교 안보의 지형이 바뀌고 산업과 일의 방식이 AI를 중심으로 재편되는 지금 더 이상 부분적인 처방만으로는 충분하지 않습니다. 필요한 것은 구조적 전환, 그리고 변화의 속도에 맞서는 국가적 선택입니다.
세상을 움직이는 거대한 힘은 깊이 있는 대화와 진심 어린 만남에서 시작한다고 생각합니다. 이번 포럼에서는 세계 경제의 혼돈과 해법, 새로운 국제 질서 속 한국의 외교 전략, AI가 이끄는 산업의 대전환, 그리고 혁신 성장을 위한 규제 완화까지 우리 앞에 과제를 폭넓게 다루게 됩니다. 그 모든 논의 속에서 대한민국의 앞으로 나아갈 길에 대한 실마리를 함께 찾아가길 기대합니다.